What's up, everyone? You're listening to Hey Man, the advice podcast for men. I'm Avi Klein.
I'm Sam Graham-Filson.
I'm a therapist. Sam's a novelist. Each week, we answer one of your questions and hopefully get a few of our own answered as well. This week, our guest is Rich Dorment, editor-in-chief of Men's Health magazine. Rich took over about 2 years ago, and if you haven't read Men's Health recently, there's way more coverage about mental health, mental resilience, and a more expanded view about what it means to be a healthy man today.
Disclaimer here, my co-host, Avi Klein, happens to be a contributor to Men's Health and has a recent piece in the magazine. So check that out as well.
So usually what we've been doing lately is I'm going to read the question now.
Okay.
And you can let it percolate.
Okay.
And we can talk about it for a little bit and then we'll come back to it later.
Sure.
All right. Hey, man. I'm on a group text with a bunch of old college friends, and lately things have been getting pretty heated. We're all politically to the left, but there's been intense disagreement about the Democratic primaries. Lately, there's a subset of the group that's been intensely vocal about their love for one candidate, and have been talking a lot of shit about the other candidates. One friend seems to have gone completely off the rails and just posts memes all the time. Privately, some friends who are undecided or support someone else have been sharing how much they hate it, and I've noticed way less activity from them on the chat. I don't want this to splinter my friend group, but feel like either way I'm going to be forced to take a side. How do I keep the peace? Signed, pacifist in Prospect Heights. You might be a pacifist in Prospect Heights.
I am from Prospect Heights, but I'm definitely not a political pacifist when it comes to this stuff. Yeah, does this resonate?
Oh,
with you,
sure.
this question?
I mean, I think there are many people who can relate to this. And it's not just their group, their friends on a group chat. It's relationships and within families and at work. I think everybody's sort of trying to figure out how to bridge this divide that seemingly has come between a lot of us.
It is funny how, we'll come back to it, but politics is just something. I feel like there are a lot of things that people know to politely skirt the issue around, but people do not hold back when it comes to their political views.
Yeah, and I think something that's changed about politics, particularly in the last, I'd say, 4 to 6 years, is that where politics used to be a sort of unifying mechanism in our society. You had political parties and you had people who would come together to actually agree. It has become an incredibly divisive tool.
Yeah.
Even within so-called political parties, you have factions and disagreements, and which are all well and good, but it is very hard to talk about politics in something approaching mixed company.
Yeah, I think I was thinking about this on the way over here. We got a sneak preview of the question, which is why is it so touchy? And even watching the debate last night, I was just trying to figure out what is it about politics? And I think it's that if you disagree with somebody, one of the easiest next steps to take is to basically accuse the person of being stupid or immoral.
Right.
And I think nothing makes people feel more wounded and insecure and angry than being accused of either being a bad person or being stupid.
Yeah.
So,
I think it's gone from us thinking that the other side is wrong to us thinking the other side is bad. And that's, I think there's plenty of blame to go on both sides.
Yeah. So we'll try to figure out some solutions for this guy in the back half of the episode.
Yeah.
But we wanted to start out just by talking to you. For our listeners who haven't met you yet, why don't you just quickly introduce yourself and tell us what you do for work?
Sure. My name is Rich Dorment. I'm the editor-in-chief of a magazine called Men's Health, which has been around for about 32 years. And we are a print publication. We are a website. We are a social feed. We are a YouTube channel. And basically our goal with every story and with every issue is to help our audience of roughly 50 million Americans become stronger, faster, better versions of themselves.
When did you take over as editor-in-chief?
About 2 years ago now.
Okay. So my sort of most sort of frequent relationship with Men's Health is reading the Men's Health big book of exercise and fitness and the big book of nutrition, both of which I look at an embarrassing amount. But yeah, I mean, and from time to time, when I'm traveling, I like to pick it up and read, the latest workout routines and things like that. But I definitely I don't know if I'm just noticing this because our show is, kind of about mental health or whatever, but it seems like in the past year or so, there's been more content about mental health. And I'm wondering, like, was that an initiative that you were particularly interested in, expanding the Men's Health brand beyond kind of just ripped abs towards a ripped mind?
Nothing wrong with ripped abs. I'm glad you noticed that. That is one of the initiatives that I led when I joined about 2 years ago. And one of the things that I wanted to do with the brand was to recenter it around fitness, around the words in its title. It is a magazine for men, and it's a magazine for all men. And it's also about health, but how are we defining health these days? And the way that I think about it and the way that the magazine has come to approach it is as a whole body, whole mind, whole life concept. So what does that mean? So you've got the 3 tent poles in our front of book section, which is basically the first half of the magazine. You've got the body section, which sort of speaks to what you were referring to earlier. That's working out. That's what you talk about when you go see a doctor. It's how you feed yourself and nutrition. So that's the body, and that's fairly straightforward. Then there's the mind section, which is really just this idea of our goal is really to discuss mental health in the context of strength as opposed to weakness. I think that's a real paradigm shift for most people, and especially most men. When we talked about mental health previously in prior generations, and even as recently as 10 years ago, it was always because something was wrong or because we were having a crisis. And I think just as people go to the gym to work on their muscles, or just because people try to eat well so that they can feel better, I think there are lots of different things, both at home and in other professional settings, where people can enhance their mental health in a context of strength and self-improvement. So that's something we concentrate, in every issue, but also constantly online. And then there's this idea of what we just call the life section. And really, it's just recognizing the fact that to be a guy today is much different than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, as far as how we work, how we partner, how we parent, how we drink and eat, certainly. All these decisions that we make from the moment we get up to the moment we go to bed at night are much different than they used to be. And I think the market is flooded with fake news and lots of misleading information. So our audience looks to Men's Health for guidance and for information and for inspiration about how to make better choices that matter.
So that sort of paradigm shift you guys are trying to sort of bring about in the culture of viewing mental health as a sign of strength rather than, or seeking out ways to improve your mental health as a sign of strength rather than a sign of weakness. Have you gotten pushback from readers? Like, do you ever get letters or tweets from guys who are just like, I don't read my mental health to be told to go to the Men's Health to be told to go to the shrink, man. Like, just give me the stuff that I like, the workout routines and the protein smoothies and stuff like that. Stop talking about mental health. Do you get any of that?
No, I think most people recognize, and I think particularly when you point it out to people, that's why a lot of people work out to begin with, because it sort of helps clear their mind. It helps them work through some things. People who are serious about fitness understand the neurochemical process involved, whether it's endorphins or other hormones. So, no, I mean, there's really no pushback. What I think you see is that the culture writ large and how it is defining men and masculinity isn't really where men are. I think there's a misalignment between where most guys really are in their relationship to their mental health and how society sort of defines and perceives them.
Can you say more? What are you noticing?
Well, I mean, I think just that question, just this idea that there would be this resistance is a natural question, and I understand where it's coming from. The fact that there isn't at all, I think just goes to show that I think our audience in particular, which granted is not sample size, they come to us because they're interested in self-improvement. So that's we have that going for us. But the fact that our audience comes to us hungry for this type of guidance and this information, I think really goes to show that, we're much more evolved than, some people who think that we're all just, terribly repressed.
Mm-hmm. A few months ago, you published a big article that kind of starts with the premise of wondering if you have male friends or how real your friendships are. Can you just tell us a little bit about that article and the kind of journey you went on talking to different folks and some of the conclusions you drew?
Sure. I think that's been a popular narrative around men today, is that we don't have any friends. And it's something that you've seen repeated in journalism, but also in more sort of narrative treatments, this idea. And because men don't have any friends, we are suffering for it. We don't have intimate relationships. We don't know how to interact with anybody. We're bottling up all our emotions. And not only are we suffering for it, but everybody's suffering for it. Our partners, certainly, who sometimes take the blame, what's called emotional gold digging,
Right.
as one writer has put it. But also just us, because we don't have friendship and we don't have a healthy outlet, we're short-circuiting and we're doing all these terrible things, to the world. So that to me was a very interesting idea to start with.
Did you feel like that was true for you in your own life?
No.
Okay.
And I felt that I had different relationships than, say, my wife or in women that I noticed. But I didn't necessarily think they were better or worse. They were just different. So that's sort of where I started from. And in looking a lot closer at the data and the most recent sort of statistics, there really isn't that much of a difference as far as the number of close people, close intimates that men and women have. But it's the nature of the relationship that's different. And I think there are lots of different reasons why women in particular may be forming closer bonds with other women. And I get into this in this piece. Some of it may be biological, some of it may be social conditioning. But what I ultimately came away with is that just because one mode of friendship is different than another doesn't make it less valuable or less enriching. Something else I came to the conclusion of is that men don't need more friends, men need therapy. And
I liked that conclusion.
And
personally.
I think what's often mistaken, particularly with female-female relationships, is this therapeutic quality to it. There's a catharsis to it where there's an unburdening of one's feelings. And, I have this problem, let me talk to you about it. That's fine if that's what you're looking for in a friendship, but I don't think that should be the definition of a healthy relationship, of a healthy friendship. I think if you're looking to do that to somebody, if you're looking to unload and help have that person unpack however you're feeling and what some potential solutions are, there's a great word for that type of person, and that person is professionally trained, they're typically certified, and they are therapists. So I think we shouldn't get confused about what we're getting out of these different types of relationships. And I also don't think that because men like to play basketball or play golf with each other, and because they're not bearing their innermost feelings, doesn't make those relationships any less valuable than maybe two girlfriends who get together to talk about, something much more intimate.
What do you think about that? Because I feel like off the podcast, you and I often say to each other, like, we don't have any friends.
Yeah, I mean, there's just to address that first, I think, just something happens when you're in your mid to late 30s and you have kids, and then your friends start to have kids. First of all, a lot of them move to places like the suburbs where it's cheaper to live than New York City, and they're farther away, and, your old war buddies basically are no longer around the corner. But then, for the guys who are still there, who are still around, it can feel sometimes awkward. We've talked about this on the show before, to be like, hey, do you want to just come over to my house and, have tea or something? So, and the reason why that is an issue, I think, particularly for older guys with families, is like, I can't just really afford to go out and get obliterated at a bar on Wednesday night when I have to wake up at 5:30 to take care of my 1-year-old, So it just feels like it limits these options. And you're like, well, can I hang out with my friend if I'm not drinking with him? And also, I'm so used to doing activities, and you get to this in your piece, activities where I'm doing something with my male friend.
Shoulder to shoulder.
Shoulder to shoulder, right. That's the term for it, where, ideally it would be playing a sport or, maybe working out or something with a friend. But even just going to a bar and like having it be the activity of watching the same game together with your, instead of looking each other in the eye, you're looking at the TV, you're looking in the same direction. So, so that feeling of like, just like, oh, I feel just awkward, inviting someone to my house. gave me that feeling of like, shit, do I even have friends anymore? Because my wife, it doesn't feel awkward at all having a friend just come over and chat without any alcohol, you know? So that's one issue. But I think
You're
like,
reminding me before
yeah,
because I owe a listener reached out and gave us a hard time about saying that men don't like to do that. And he was like, I do that all the time. So I wanted to give him props.
That's
for
true.
that.
We shouldn't generalize. We don't like to do that, we have
We're
a hard time.
uncomfortable
We have
with
a
it,
hard time doing it. All this stuff is tricky. It just seems like in certain ways there are so many more rules for guys because women, when the default is like, not all women. My wife, for example, when the default is if she has a friend over, they will talk about emotional stuff. It's not like if they wanted to then go work out or do an activity together, that would feel weird.
Right.
Sure.
Whereas for a man, it's like it does
that-
feel weird to do that extra thing.
And just to your earlier point, I mean, I actually don't think there are any rules. I think the only sort of error perhaps we make in approaching this is that there's one right way to be a friend or one right way to have a friendship, and there isn't.
Yeah.
They're all different kinds of things depending upon what you want to get out of it.
Right. So, but you do conclude at the end of the piece, you know, if you really need someone to talk to, maybe you should go to therapy. And I sometimes wonder, I bet Avi would be pro this because it would make him very wealthy.
Ka-ching, ka-ching.
But I sometimes wonder if like basically, you know, all men could benefit from it. Like,
I mean, everybody could benefit from
everybody.
therapy. I mean, now I'm really speaking Avi's language.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, and again, from a receiving end, you know, I mentioned in the piece, like we've all had friends who get drunk and like start to cry, and you're like, what am I supposed to do here?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not a therapist. Like,
Right.
I don't want to solve your problems.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we're just barking up the wrong tree. And I think particularly now when so much of the stigma, not enough, but so much of the stigma around therapy and seeking help has been drained, you know, why not?
Yeah.
You know?
Why not?
Why not?
Yeah, and you know, look, and the other thing that I think you know you touched on earlier, but is important, you know, and I do try to remind myself of this. It can be a real burden to lay all of your emotional stuff on your wife because you feel like no one else wants to listen to it. That's a lot. I mean, you know, I can tell.
Not only is it a lot, it's kind of a turnoff.
It's
you know
a
what I mean?
turnoff.
It's
and
the
I mean,
worst.
it's depressing. Like,
And also, like, but the alternative's pretty bad too, which is that,
Absolutely.
like, for too many of us, our partners get the worst of us.
yes,
Right? Like, we're performative all day.
Yeah.
We're doing our job. We're hanging out with our friends, and maybe we may feel crummy or whatever, but we're still there with our buddies and we're doing whatever. And then we get home and we can finally drop the curtain and, like, we're not our best selves.
right. Yeah, I'm
And
sure.
they take that as well. So the idea that we should be optimizing and prioritizing our mental health, yes, is good for us. But like, let's think of the ladies here. and our kids too.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, totally.
if you have kids. So yeah, I mean, there's really no downside.
I think, yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to imagine how sexy my wife finds it when, you know, I put on like a professional face and confidence all day. And then I come home and I'm like, let me give you my top 10 insecurities right now. Let me tell you why.
They're like, how was work? It sucked.
Yeah,
Like, what do you
exactly.
want me to say? You know, no, I mean, it's, yeah, they don't deserve that.
Right,
That's not
right.
what they're in this for.
I'm curious, you know, there definitely is in men's health, like pieces around sort of mental health resilience and strength, but I've been struck by, there are some very vulnerable pieces there. And I think we probably first like became aware of the shift when Jason Rogers wrote his piece, and then we had him on later. And like,
Just
that's
remind people who Jason
Jason
Rogers
Rogers is the fencer who openly in Men's Health discussed his very long struggle with erectile dysfunction and performance anxiety, which to me, when I saw it, I was like, holy shit, like that's incredibly vulnerable and brave to do. So tell me about like those editorial decisions too, to feature those kinds of stories.
It's just, you know, we can't just show people on their best day. That's not realistic, and I don't think it would resonate with most people. You shouldn't do all of those. I don't think that discussing mental health solely in the context of crisis is helpful to anybody.
Right.
I think
It's scary.
and
Yeah.
scary, and,
Yeah.
and also just not really relevant.
Yeah.
A lot of people can't relate to that.
Yeah.
So to do that all the time, A, would be a downer.
Yeah.
And B, we're not really, you know, resonating with a lot of people. I think you have to have a spectrum, because just as, again, as we talk about nutrition or fitness or hard health or any of these other things we talk about, there are different degrees of severity. And I think it's important for us to hit as many different notes as we can.
We should get to the advice segment in a second, but I'm just curious on a personal level. Being the face of Men's Health, do you
And the body.
and the body
And the body.
Well, that's what I'm getting to.
Yeah.
Like anytime you have like, you know, a double cheeseburger, people are like, dude, you're the you know, are you supposed to be doing that? Aren't you supposed to only be drinking kelp smoothies? What's wrong with you? Do you feel a pressure to you know, be perfect?
Don't we all? No. Two points to that. One, I like kelp smoothies, so that's part of why I have the job, is that I'm interested and I'm engaged with this culture. But more generally, and in all seriousness, I like to think that I am an actual representative of our audience, which is to say, like, I'm not our fitness director. Like, our fitness director is a guy named Ebenezer Samuel. Follow him on Instagram. He's amazing, and he looks like a Marvel superhero.
He really does.
And he can tell you anything and everything about the human body and working. And like, that's not me. You can talk to my senior editor who handles food and nutrition, Paul Kita, about all different kinds of, you know, diets and different approaches to nutrition. And like, and he certainly lives that life. Like, that's also not me. I'm like everybody else. I'm the surrogate, the primary surrogate for the audience, in that I'm doing the best that I can. I try to eat well. I try to work out when I can. I try to have a good work-life balance. I try not to look like a slob. I try to be nice to people. I'm trying.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real benefit in my job, because I don't take anything for granted. I think when you're only listening to the experts, I think there's a sense of, well, you should know that already. Or a sense of, you have to be doing something. Whereas I think I come at it, again, as a surrogate for the audience, where I'm saying, you know, like, what's the information and how can I use it? And how can you inspire me to do it? That's really like my end goal as a surrogate. So yeah, like I try to eat well, but like not all the time.
Have you like picked up some good workout tips since you've started?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I work with the smartest, brightest people and sort of across the board on all the different things that we cover. And I learn something new every single day. And some of it's workout related, some of it's heart health, some of it's mental health. I try to apply as much of it as I can, but like, I'm married to a very busy woman. I have 3 small children. I've got a mortgage and car payments and the whole midlife nightmare. And like, I'm just doing the best that I can. And I think that's a lot closer to most of my audience than a guy who works like, not that Eb works out 12 hours a day, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
One other just slightly self-serving question. My wife is an editor and not in chief, but pretty high up there. And I see how insane her hours are. How do you achieve some kind of balance when there's always 10 million things on your to-do list for work and you have 3 kids? What are your tricks for that?
It's really hard. And I think first you kind of have to go easy on yourself. I try to give myself permission to make mistakes. And sometimes I'm not being the best parent that I can be, and sometimes I'm not being the best worker that I can be because of these tensions in my life, and that's okay. Like, I think we have to, like, I can't beat myself up all the time. That said, I do, wherever I am, I try to be present, and I try to not be doing the other thing. So when I'm at work, I try to be at work, and when I'm with my kids, I try to be with my kids and put my phone away. You know, like a lot of people in dual income households, or just people in general, because of technology, I'm able to get home in a decent hour and still sort of keep an eye on things, and then get back online when my kids go to sleep. So it's not the healthiest way to do it, but like typically I'm sort of offline between like 6 and 8, and then it's all full steam ahead from like 8 to 11.
This leads to one more obligatory question that I always end up asking everyone, which is, do you meditate? Because that idea of being present no matter what you're doing, you sound like maybe you're a meditator.
I am a meditator.
Okay, I figured.
We're going to do a Hey Man meditate. Sam talks about meditation drinking game.
That's my favorite topic.
I meditate every morning for about 15 minutes. And it's not like transcendental. It's not like real meditation. Like, I don't like have a mantra or anything. But it's breathing. I repeat things. I'll sort of try to visualize my day, and I will anticipate how some things might make me feel, whether that's anxious or unhappy or frustrated, and I'll try to get out in front of that. And because usually that happens, I kind of know myself at this point, and I know how I'm going to anticipate certain things. And that really helps when the actual moment comes. Because either you're relieved that like, oh, wow, that terrible thing I was dreading didn't happen, or you're totally prepared and like you're not really caught off guard. That doesn't sound like meditation, but to me, it is incredibly calming and centering and grounding, which is effectively
This sounds
what
like
I think of.
sounds like meditation to me.
I wanted to go back just something when you asked the question about balance, and I was just wondering, like, I am not so hard on myself about not being a good father, although I could probably stand to maybe maybe give myself some more scrutiny.
Right.
And I was just wondering, like, how, like, I don't know. I was curious, like, how do you are you hard on yourself about that? Like,
I'm much harder on myself about like whether I'm sort of being lazy about work. I feel like I'm actually much more forgiving about fatherhood, and I think the reason why is because there's just it's the most impossible job, and it's just like there's so many opportunities
yeah,
to do the right thing and a million opportunities to do the wrong thing, and
Yeah.
of course it's just like it just seems to me like being a perfect dad would truly be impossible and drive you crazy if you were. So I don't know. For me, I'm able to be forgiving about it.
feel
Although
like-
I guess when I stop and think now that we're thinking about it, I'm like, shit, maybe I need to feel more guilty.
well,
about
I noticed that my
short-
wife is definitely she is much harder on herself about it.
My
about-
wife is harder on herself.
But
Yeah.
a lot of time that's internalized societal pressure.
Yeah,
Right? They feel
yeah.
like they're being more stringently judged, whereas guys get a pass. I think, thankfully, that's becoming less and less the case. I think,
It's true, though.
I don't think like guys can go out and play golf for 6 hours anymore. Like that's like child neglect.
Yeah.
That's just not how most modern relationships work. So I think guys are increasingly and thankfully much more on the hook as far as like literally getting their hands dirty every minute of every day.
Yeah.
We haven't mentioned it, but my son is here.
I know. I was very pleased that you brought your son with you.
My 9-year-old son is waiting, reading. He's with me today. He wanted to come and see me with work. He's on vacation this week. My wife's at work. So yeah, he's here.
That's cool. If I brought my son, he's 3. This
No,
entire
forget it. I
office
have
would
a
be
3-year-old
destroyed.
and she's not here. Explicitly not invited.
Yeah, I have an 18-month-old and she's a terrorist.
Yes.
So.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I think I don't know, just in terms of general advice, the not beating up on yourself advice always strikes me as like the wisest maybe of any type of advice, and it's just it is something that like definitely after having kids I had to learn how to do less beating up on myself, and you know it's to me that's like the game of life of figuring out how to not beat up on yourself and forgive yourself when
People
you make
hate
mistakes.
on self-care as a term
Yeah.
term of art and term of practice, and I half agree with them. But at the essence of what we all make fun of is this idea of like having to take care of yourself and as being as nice to yourself as you are to other people, and as forgiving of yourself as you are with other people. And that's a really hard place to get to, particularly
really
if you're a driven type of person, or if you're an anxious or depressed person,
Yeah.
because those are certainly difficulties. But as I say it like 5 times a day, like self-care is real, like, and you have to pay attention to it. You really do.
Yeah. Well, there's the fear that if you start forgiving yourself, then you're going to lose your edge, and of course, it's never true.
And that gets back to this idea of mental health as in the context of strength, right? Like you're not doing self-care because you're weak. You're doing it because you're strong.
Right.
And it's like you don't go to the gym, like those guys who are like doing massive rips in the gym. Like they're not doing that because they're weak. They're doing that because they're strong. It's the same thing with mental health.
So let's get mentally unhealthy by talking about politics. First, actually, Avi, why don't you just tell people about the piece that you recently wrote for Men's Health? Avi is an occasional contributor to Men's Health also, and
Full disclosure.
yes. So you recently wrote a piece,
Right. Well, so the January-February issue had there's a package or a focus on how to sort of survive the political season, and so we had this question and felt like it would be a good fit for this very topic. And what I wrote about was just about the stress response that we have when we start to engage with politics, and the helplessness that we feel when we can't really do anything, and the way that drives us to just circle back to that 24/7 news cycle.
And for people, you guys should read Rich's piece and Avi's piece on menshealth.com.
For sure. We'll put the links up.
But for people who aren't experts on this, can you just tell people, like, what does stress actually physically, what are the physical risks of stress? Because I feel like people don't quite understand or even believe that stress is actually physically bad for you.
Right. Well, we have it is called the human stress response, right? And stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline get released when we're in a stressful situation. Sometimes they are actually stressful, like someone is trying to attack you. And sometimes it's just our perception telling us that it's stressful. And over time, although those hormones are released to help you, like adrenaline makes you stronger, right? People do amazing things in a crisis because of adrenaline. But over time, if your body keeps producing those hormones, the effects it is related to heart disease and diabetes. It will end your life earlier if you live a life filled with stress.
So this is literally a life or death issue. You need to chill the fuck out.
Important.
All right, so let's read the question again.
Yeah. Hey man, I'm on a group text with a bunch of old college friends, and lately things have been getting pretty heated. We're all politically to the left, but there's been intense disagreement about the Democratic primaries. Lately, there's a subset of the group that's been intensely vocal about their love for one candidate and have been talking a lot of shit about the other candidates. One friend seems to have gone completely off the rails and just posts memes all the time. Privately, some friends who are undecided or support someone else have been sharing how much they hate it, and I've noticed way less activity from them on the chat. I don't want this to splinter my friend group, but feel like either way, I'm going to be forced to take a side. How do I keep the peace? Signed, Pacifist in Prospect Heights. So there's the politics piece, and then there's just like negotiating like group dynamics piece, which is the other important component here,
Yeah. And this guy is particularly asking for advice on how he can be the peacekeeper. Mm-hmm. He's not doing the vitriolic thing. I almost feel like it'd be easier for me to give him advice on
how to be less of an asshole or something.
Yeah,
like that.
because I definitely, I learned my lesson, but I was kind of that guy on the group chat last election cycle in like 2016 and like going super hard for my candidate and then just like dumping on the other guys who were supporting the other candidate in a way where like it started out just as playful trash talk, but it definitely went too far.
Do you have any firsthand experience with this?
No, because I don't talk politics. Particularly on text messages. I think to your point earlier, there are a couple of things going on here, both politics and group dynamics, but there's also a technological aspect to it and what's appropriate via text message and what is best left in real life. I think one of the downsides, certainly, of digital technology is that it gives people license to act out in a way for which they do not feel responsible, or they do not, they don't have to sort of pay the price of saying something to someone's face,
right? Or
having to sort of sit in that lingering awkwardness that comes after you insult someone to their face. So I think there's that element too. So I think with a question like this, you kind of have to take a multi-pronged approach to it. I think the one guy who's really stirring up shit, I think like they have to call it. This person has to call that guy, and say, tell him on the phone, like, look, like, I don't want to get too serious here, but like, I really don't. It makes me really uncomfortable. It's making everybody really uncomfortable. I know you feel strongly about it, but like, maybe just consider easing off the gas a little bit. And then if he wants to, I'm assuming it's a him, maybe it's not. In the sort of context of the group chat, just being like, hey guys, like, can we not talk about this here? Like, I thought this was for like ball busting and having fun. Like, when did this become a Reddit forum for political views? I think if you recognize the problem and elevate it and isolate it, I think hopefully you can excise it. Because otherwise it's just going to be there. And again, I really doubt the wisdom of a group text chain about contemporary politics. Like in any form, like you could
With
be,
anyone?
if it's all Bernie bros, it's fine. Like there's still going to be a fight that's going to break out.
Totally.
And I just don't think it's a good idea.
I have to say, I mean, my stomach clenched a bit imagining being the person who's like, can we not do this? Because, like, I don't know. That would personally be hard for me, but I should probably toughen up a bit. I feel like it's also pretty courageous to take that stance on behalf of everyone. Like, everyone will thank you later. But I also want to recognize how uncomfortable it would be to probably be the guy to speak up and, like, say, like, I don't want this to keep going anymore. Yeah.
Well, again, it's also, I think most group texts now have like a unsubscribe, basically. Like you can leave the conversation.
Yeah.
You can say like, guys, like this is making me uncomfortable. It's stressing me out.
Yeah.
I come here to talk to you guys and keep in touch and have fun. And like, this is not any of those things.
Yeah.
So I'm going to leave
Yeah.
and maybe I'll talk to
Talk to you in 2021.
No, or like I'll text each of you individually. We can get a new thing going. But like, this is not a fun party. This is not what I want to be a part of. Because again, if it's stressing him out and fraying his relationships, then like, why stay in it? You know?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to, maybe not on group text, but let's imagine they could move this over to a slightly less trolly platform like email. Is there a way for a group of guys who are friends to discuss politics civilly, or you think it's just a non-starter?
I think you can barely discuss politics in person civilly.
But when I'm 40. When I was growing up, like you just didn't talk politics outside of like your closest relationships. It just was, or if you were like a professional who was out there. But like, when did we feel comfortable talking about these things in sort of casual social relationships? These are things that people believe deeply, and they believe deeply in their sort of righteousness. And I don't know why we think it's a good idea to just sort of put it all out there and expect everyone to either agree with us or worse, disagree with us. It just doesn't seem like a very good idea to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking the counter argument, like the person who would say we should talk about it, what would they say? I think they would say it's immoral to let people make these decisions and not try to change minds. Is that am I representing that fairly?
Or maybe that's I'm trying to think back to my frame of mind in 2016. Not more just like, we live in a democracy and
let's have it out.
Yeah, let's just let's have a debate about this and see if anyone can be persuaded to come along to this other side, And then it just got out of control and got way too heated.
You're not Lincoln, and respectfully, they're not Douglas. Like that's not what's happening here. Particularly over a lot of the forums that these are happening, whether it's cable news or Twitter or texts. So I think no good can come of it. And like fun fact about Men's Health is, with the exception of this package, we have a blanket rule that we do not cover politics because we try to be a unifying place where people see the best of themselves and where they see their commonalities with other people, where politics as it is practiced and perceived today is an inherently divisive field. And whether you're talking about a presidential election or something much more local and personal, it can divide us into us and them very quickly. And that for me is just not what, I want to be about.
I mean, I think what's indisputable is that politics are frequently bad for your mental health. They also do seem, it's totally understandable that, Men's Health isn't a forum for discussing these things. There are places where it is appropriate.
Of course.
But it's still, it's still, even where it is appropriate, it's like, it's still taxing on your mental health unless you are, basically just with people who 1,000,000,000% agree with you. Yeah. But now even, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, like the fights within both parties have become so intense that like, even that is like, a powder keg. So I don't know, but it just seems like one of these things where it's like, it's very bad for your mental health, or it's very risky for your mental health to get engaged in it. And it still can be an important thing to do. And, how do we make the best of a tough thing to discuss? You know?
I was seeing someone earlier today, and he was getting really anxious because we were getting into like difficult territory. And I said, I want you to be uncomfortable. I just don't want you to be too uncomfortable.
Right.
Because you do have to be, it's okay to be stressed and it's okay to be uncomfortable. You really don't grow unless you're in that sweet spot, but probably just like wandering into a political discussion, like you're unprepared for what you're about to take on. If you really, like, what's your intention here? If you want to learn, if you want to really engage with the issue, you sort of have to be able to slow your heart down when it starts to get elevated. And if it's just day to day and it's just coming at you from every angle, like there's no way you can engage with that thoughtfully or meaningfully. So what's really going on?
And I don't think the answer is disengagement, certainly on a personal level. And one of the things that we get into in our piece, which I think is a really interesting analogy, we liken our media and news consumption today to food and nutrition. So like for millennia, human beings were basically like one bad day away from starving, right? Like they didn't know where their next meal was coming from. So they would hoard food. Whenever they could get it, they would eat as much of it as they could because they didn't know when their next meal was coming from. That was true, by and large, generally speaking. And, within the last 100 years or so, as food has become more plentiful and less expensive, it's gone everywhere. And what's happened is that people don't know how to eat. And so we have an obesity epidemic. We have a spike in diabetes. You have this sense of people not knowing how to consume food properly. And I think the same thing has happened much more recently and much more intensely with information. So for millennia, human beings would hoard information because they didn't know when the next century or the next, homing pigeon was coming with news. Until the last 20 years, information was much more scarce. And now there is so much information. It is everywhere and it is free. And we don't know how to consume it responsibly. So we basically have some sort of like, whether it's obesity or diabetes or some sort of condition of the mind where we're not processing it correctly. Right. And because of that, we have mental illness and we have physical illness as a result of that. So through this piece, we go how we using this sort of example of nutrition, we talk about how you can consume information more responsibly, both for yourself and others. And it's a really important that we have a much more rigorous diet when it comes to the information that we're consuming.
I mean, the one counterpoint, this is not specifically politics, but like politics adjacent, I guess. Like in a therapy group that I'm in right now, there's been like a very sort of heated discussion about race in therapy, because therapy is like a really white institution, it's like
on both sides of the couch.
Yeah. And so people were starting to want to change that, but some people did not want to have that conversation, and therapists did not want to like examine their white privilege or didn't feel like this was the space to do it. And I understand the discomfort, certainly. And I was more sympathetic to the argument of like, if you just say you don't want to do it, that's just another kind of privilege, where you're just ignoring something. And so I'm not sure how you draw the line between when is it important and when should a conversation be forced? I don't know if forcing something is ever really productive, but like when should you take that stand versus something like sending Bernie memes?
Any other thoughts on how to help that? I feel like,
I think Rich nailed it pretty early on, to be honest.
Just call. I agree. Picking up the phone and calling the guy is a good way to do it. And the only thing I would ask though, before we wrap up on this, is like, it's always easier said than done because often we have questions like this and we try to give advice of like, just be direct, call the guy, like, say what you really, mean. But I find that the hard part is the nitty gritty of like, how do you actually have that conversation? So I wonder, like, how would you do it if you picked up the phone and called him? What would your approach be? Would it be like really tough love and direct and be like, you got to cut this shit out? Would it be like, would you try to like, loosen him up by complimenting one of his memes first? How do you deal with a guy like this?
I think you're just honest.
Yeah.
I mean, this person's supposedly your friend. You've putatively known him for some time. Be direct and be honest. You don't have to be like weeping about it. And you can just be like, look, like it's making everybody uncomfortable.
Yeah.
The fact that you don't know that is maybe part of the problem, and that's a separate problem. but like, just for now, can you stop?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, again, easier for me to say, removed from the situation, but I always find it easier as a motivation to consider the alternative. Like, yes, no one wants to have this conversation, but what's the alternative? He keeps posting this terrible stuff that's making everybody uncomfortable. You hope that he stops and like you just bury it and you're like, oh fuck, burn it. Not burn it, but like
Probably it's burning.
well, like no, but like Avi's texting again, like every time, like so you have a pit in your stomach. Like, what's the alternative?
Yeah.
So, and that's true, I think, of most difficult conversations in life, whether it's at work or in personal relationships or romances or whatever. Like, the bad decision can seem a lot better when you consider the alternatives.
It's funny because, I mean, of course, it would also be helping this friend because
he doesn't know.
Because he doesn't know. And I'm sure you guys have at least one person in your feed like this. But like, particularly on Facebook, I think is the worst. Like, there's like 3 or 4 people from my past who just seem completely not self-aware about the amount of ranting they do and self-serving kind of ego stroking that they do on social media. And I always feel like, man, like, when is someone going to do the favor of just calling this person up and be like, man, you're like kind of embarrassing yourself out there. You got to like limit it, you know, but no one does it. And it's like, and then they just continue to embarrass themselves. So you can think of it as a favor to this guy.
And an exceptional thing to do. If nobody does it, you could be, I mean, it's really.
You're doing this guy a major solid. Yeah. I think, and again, this is a sort of cousin to your aside about race, but like, if we learn nothing from Me Too over the last 2 to 3 years, it's that it's amazing how much guys don't realize they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I think whether it's implicit bias or just letting their enthusiasms get the better of them and not really being self-aware, it really helps when you can point something out. I mean, like, actually, like, this is actually how the rest of us perceiving it. Right. Do with that information what you will.
Right.
But just so you know, this is what the rest of us think about it. That's incredibly valuable information. And for me, that's a true solid between friends.
Also, look, if this guy does in good faith care about his candidate, then you're doing him a favor because you're helping him help his candidate.
Yeah.
Right now he's turning people off.
Yes.
You know. So anyway, so we wrap up the show by asking every guest to share a piece of advice that they've heard at one point in their life. Could be from a person, it could be something you read that has stuck with you and that you come back to. So we're wondering what that is.
And it can be about anything?
Yes.
Anything that matters to you.
Could be something your dad said. Could be something Socrates said.
I don't know who ever said it to me, but it was something that sort of changed the trajectory of my life, or at least my career. It was this idea that work has to be its own reward. That you can't do your job and you can't pursue a career if your goal is money, or if your goal is a job title, or if it's something other than finding a lot of satisfaction and fulfillment in the work itself. And once I came to realize that and understand it, my priorities became much clearer. My direction became much clearer, and sort of all sorts of doors opened up for me in a way that maybe they would have anyway. But I always felt like when I was always so anxious and frustrated about what I didn't have, and I wasn't thankful for the work itself, it's just kind of no way to live.
How old were you when you figured that out?
I was 29.
It's pretty young to figure that out, I think.
And I do kind of think I figured it out on my own, but it has saved me more times than I know, particularly when you look on Instagram and you see everybody's life around you and you're like, thinking about all these life choices that you made, and ultimately, like, the work has to be its own reward. And if it's not, find work that is.
I was just talking to my wife about this like a couple days ago, that truly all of the most successful people that I know are the ones who are just most present and deeply invested in the quality of their work.
Yeah.
as opposed to the external reward of being famous or successful or well
And that's
paid.
not to say happy. I find
no,
happiness
that's true.
this
Very elusive.
this incredible sort of mental burden that I think a lot of us are trying to get away from. Everyone has really hard days, and there are times when everybody hates their job. It's the work. It's what you're actually doing and what you're putting your time and energy and love and labor into. And when you can find something like that and sort of find that groove where it is actually rewarding, it changes everything.
So people can obviously find your work at menshealth.com and on the newsstands, but what about social media? Where can people find you?
I'm at Rich Dorment, Dorment. And you can also follow Men's Health.
Cool. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank
Thank you guys.
All right, that's it for our show this week. Thanks everyone for listening. If you have a question that you want some advice on, please email us at heymanpod@gmail.com, or better yet, give us a call, 917-426-4326, and leave us a voicemail. All questions, if they make it on the show, are anonymous. No need to worry. You can follow us on Instagram or Twitter at heymanpod, and if you have a moment, give us a review, Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you get your podcasts, and better yet, click subscribe. Thanks so much. Have a great week. Peace.